Welcome to The Explainer. So today we are definitely not diving into some dry, dusty theological lecture. Not at all. Instead, we're going to unpack a brilliant, honestly beautiful piece of ancient poetry that maps out this profoundly deep emotional journey. We're looking at Psalm 61. It's a text that literally travels from absolute crushing despair to rock-solid assurance, all in just a few short lines.
I want you to imagine, just for a second, the raw desperation of calling out from the absolute fringes of the world. Hear my cry, O God. From the end of the earth I call to you. Right? That's exactly how this poem opens. It hooks you immediately. You can literally feel the isolation, that sheer vast distance, and the utter exhaustion right there in the words.
Okay, let's dive into this. Looking at the full text here from the English Standard Version, it's remarkably concise. We're talking about just an 8-verse poem. But hey, do not let its length fool you. What you'll see as we walk through this text is how it perfectly, structurally tracks a complete psychological shift, taking the speaker, and, us as the reader, from complete vulnerability to total, unwavering confidence. Part 1, A Cry from the Edge. Now, before we even hit verse 1, the text gives us some absolutely crucial context about the setting and the medium itself. Right at the top, there's this preamble, to the choir master, with stringed instruments, of David. This immediately sets a musical stage for us. It reminds us that these words weren't just scribbled in some ancient diary to be read silently. No way. They were an ancient song. They were meant to be performed out loud, carried by a very specific rhythm and the strumming of stringed instruments. Imagine this being blasted with the ancient equivalent of an acoustic band, not just whispered in a quiet library. It's a lyric that's meant to be heard and deeply felt. And that lyric starts from a place of deep, deep vulnerability. The narrator says they're calling out when my heart is faint. This really grounds us in a deeply relatable human experience. We've all been there, right? Feeling entirely drained, totally overwhelmed by circumstances, just running on empty, feeling like we're literally at the end of the earth. Actually, it's basically an ancient description of modern burnout. Part 2, 4 metaphors of refuge. But here's the thing. The narrator doesn't stay stuck in that exhaustion. They start to construct a safe space using some incredibly powerful imagery. And this brilliantly illustrates a progression. Notice these vivid physical spaces invoked in verses 2 through 4. It starts massive and external, the rock that is higher than I, an immovable landscape feature. Then it moves to human architecture, a strong tower against the enemy, built for active defense, sort of like an ancient panic room, if you will. From there, it scales way down to something much more personal, dwelling in your tent forever. And finally, it becomes deeply intimate and organic, the shelter of your wings. Let's really focus in on that last, incredibly intimate verse. Let me take refuge under the shelter of your wings, Selah. The imagery here culminates in this feeling of complete, enveloping protection. It's like a bird covering its young, right? Providing warmth and an impenetrable shield against the crazy outside world. But notice that one specific word right at the end of the sentence. Now, what's really interesting about this is that word, Selah. In ancient Hebrew poetry, Selah represents a literal pause, a structural pivot in the song. It essentially tells the singers and the musicians, hey, hold for a moment. For us reading it, it signals that a major transition is happening. The narrator has cried out, envisioned this ultimate shelter, and now, taking a deep breath, their whole emotional state is about to radically shift. Part 3, The Heritage of Vows. Coming right out of that musical pause, the tone changes completely. The text shifts abruptly from crying out in sheer desperation to acknowledging that a profound response has actually happened. Look at verse 5. For you, O God, have heard my vows. You have given me the heritage of those who fear your name. Suddenly it clicks. The narrator recognizes they've been heard. They aren't just shouting into the void anymore. And even more importantly, they are no longer alone. They've been given a heritage, meaning they're actively taking their place in this long, rich, historical lineage of believers. Let's put these two moments side by side to really see this transformation in action. On one hand, in verse 2, we had absolute isolation, crying out from the end of the earth. On the other hand, just after the pause in verse 5, we have the heritage of those who fear your name. This perfectly captures the psychological movement from feeling completely alone and marginalized to finding a really firm place of belonging within a much wider community. It's a total game changer. Part 4, The Royal Shift. Now, the poem doesn't just stop with personal grounding. It makes a sudden, highly surprising thematic pivot. When we look at the requests laid out in verses 6 and 7, the focus unexpectedly redirects completely outward. It moves away from the narrator's faint heart and suddenly points toward the sovereign ruler. The requests are really specific. Prolong the life of the king, so that his years endure to all generations. The plea is for him to be enthroned forever before God, and for God to appoint steadfast love and faithfulness to watch over him. The poem is actually placing its hope in the eternal stability and divine protection of the king. So the crucial point here is the sudden pivot from personal despair to collective royal stability. You might be wondering, why make this jump? Well, for ancient writers, connecting their personal safety to the longevity and righteous rule of their king was a way to solidify their own sense of order and peace. Basically, if the king's throne is secure under God's watchful eye, wrapped in steadfast love and faithfulness, then the whole community, including our narrator who was just crying from the ends of the earth, is completely secure as well. Part 5, An Everlasting Song. This final section brings us to the ultimate resolution of the narrator's entire emotional arc. Verse 8 reads, "So will I ever sing praises to your name as I perform my vows day after day." The poem, which began with such a desperate, exhausted cry, concludes with a beautiful vow of perpetual, joyful music. The narrator is committing to a daily action of praise, totally anchored by a newly restored strength. Let's move to and see how this builds, because this is absolutely the core of the whole text. Look at the emotional arc of Psalm 61 from start to finish. At the beginning, we have the total collapse, when my heart is faint. By the end, we have this enduring confidence, so will I ever sing praises. This contrast perfectly proves the incredible journey the text takes us on. I mean, in just 8 short verses, the author travels this vast psychological distance from total exhaustion to an unending daily rhythm of purpose. And that leaves us with something really important to chew on. How do the metaphors of the past help us understand our own search for a refuge today? Because whether it's a high rock, a strong tower, or the shelter of wings, this 3,000-year-old literary structure still perfectly maps onto our very human, very modern need for safety and belonging. It shows us that moving from the fringes to a place of security is a journey we still absolutely share today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope it gave you some great insights, and as always, keep seeking out the structure in what you learn.